The respiratory system moves the air that is used as energy for speech. The respiratory muscles control the size of the lungs by moving parts of the abdomen and the chest wall. Changes in lung size affect air pressure within the lungs, creating airflow. Respiration for speech requires careful control of air pressure to maintain the appropriate amplitude and duration of speech. The anatomy for respiration consists of the pulmonary apparatus, which provides the channel for airflow in respiration, the thoracic cavity, which surrounds the lungs and provides the structure that creates changes in lung size to promote airflow, and the muscles that move elements of the thoracic cavity to make that airflow happen. The pulmonary apparatus consists of the lungs and a set of airways. Air containing oxygen is brought to the lungs, and air containing carbon dioxide is transported out of the lungs as part of respiration for life functions. Part of the airway is the vocal tract. We'll study the larynx in Chapter 4, and the oral nasal cavities and the pharynx in Chapter 6. There is one respiratory-specific airway, which is the trachea. In addition, within the lungs, we have both a variety of airways, the bronchi and the bronchioles, as well as the actual contents of the lungs where gas exchange happens within the alveoli, all wrapped up within two linings called the pleural linings. The combination of the trachea and the bronchi is referred to as the bronchial tree. The trachea divides in half into two primary or main stem bronchi. The one on the right is larger than the one on the left, each entering into the right and left lungs respectively. The right primary bronchi divides into three secondary bronchi, and the left divides into two secondary bronchi. These enter into the different lobes of the lungs, three on the right and two on the left, and then further subdivide into tertiary bronchi. The tertiary bronchi enter into segments of the lungs. There are 10 on the right and 8 on the left. These tertiary bronchi continue subdividing into smaller and smaller bronchi until they become microscopic units. This division ends in a sequence that leads to the alveoli. With the bronchioles, they continue to subdivide until they reach a final stage of terminal bronchioles that attach to a respiratory bronchiole that attaches to an alveolar duct that ends in an individual alveolus. As shown in this image on the right, clusters of alveoli are connected to bronchioles and also surrounded by elements of the pulmonary system to bring oxygen-poor and carbon dioxide-rich blood to the alveoli, in order to exchange and add oxygen, creating oxygen-rich blood that gets sent out to the body. The composition of the bronchial tree in the larger units consists of an incomplete ring of cartilage. There is a muscle across the open section of this cartilage. In the trachea, that muscle is adjacent to the esophagus, the tube that leads down to the stomach. The inside of this ring of cartilage and muscle is lined with ciliated epithelium. The cilia help filter the air that is going into the lungs and trap any particles or pollutants. There are also glands that ensure that the surface of the trachea and the bronchi is lined with mucus, which helps with smooth airflow and also to trap additional particles. Once we get to the level of the bronchioles, there's no longer cartilage that makes up this tube. It consists entirely of epithelium. The lungs themselves can be looked at a couple of different ways. Their larger or macroscopic structure is two lungs, one on the left and one on the right. The left lung is smaller than the right lung because of the position of the heart on the left side of the thorax. These lungs are surrounded by two pleural linings. The visceral pleura is a wrapping around each lung. The parietal pleura is a cover on the inner surface of the thoracic cavity. Inside of the lungs, we have these airways that break down into smaller and smaller pieces until they end in eventually about 480 million alveoli in an adult. The alveoli have a liquid interior lining with something on them called a surfactant that helps them maintain structure and not collapse. And they are surrounded by capillaries of the circulatory system to allow gas exchange with the bloodstream. The chest wall provides a hard structure around the lungs. The thorax is composed of 12 thoracic vertebrae in the posterior part that provide attachment for the ribs. The trachea and the esophagus are just anterior to the vertebrae. There are 12 ribs on each side that provide lateral and anterior structure to the thoracic cavity. These ribs then connect anteriorly with a costal cartilage to the sternum, the bony anterior plate of the thorax. The inferior border of the thorax is defined by the diaphragm muscle. The hard structures of the thorax also support the pectoral girdle. The sternum and the first rib, the uppermost rib in the rib cage, connect to the clavicle, which is the front part of the shoulder, and to the scapula, which is the shoulder blade or the back part of the shoulder.